I've been gone for a while. I went incarnational. What I mean by that is, this is digital. It is ethereal. It's from the ether. But like all of that stuff, eventually you have to do what Jesus did. You have to get out of the clouds, and you actually have to come down and talk to people. And that's what he did. And so I've been away from the radio for about 6-7 days, because I was talking to people like you, and I was meeting people like you, and talking to entrepreneurs and finding out that there's a significant thing happening. Men and women are beginning to discover that this might be the way to really be fully alive. And so I thought about that. And, of course, it was the Memorial Day holiday. And I took some time to think about that. And then I went back to the time when I got a couple of those vets, those old World War II vets, to finally talk about it. And I'd like to bring those two things together today, just for a few minutes on a Tuesday evening, because we've got some significant things to do this week. So let's talk about, being fully alive and talking about it. That's coming up on Radio on the Edge, Real Radio, Right Now Radio, the Jesus Entrepreneur, right now. And indeed, we are back. Thank you for your patience, and thank you for taking time to listen. By the way, we are considering the things that life should bring about us, because I oftentimes teach people that you've got to find some quiet spaces, some learning spaces. And usually what I do over the Memorial Day weekend, while there's a lot of planning and celebrating, I usually take that time, that extended nice weekend, certainly to worship, certainly to do some rest and recreation, but I also take some time to do some quiet time, to find kind of a thisness and thin place where perhaps I can think and where I can decide what is this thing that I should be about, and then simply ask, what does God have in store for me as I go into June and July and August and into September? What should I be doing in the next 3 to 4 months? So I took some time to do all of those things, and I also thought about some things that I had learned in the past and some of the things I'm beginning to learn right now. We at tcenglobal.org, tcenglobal.org, and that stands for the Christian Entrepreneur Network, are continuing our up and down, back and forth, but we're making good steps forward. More and more people are joining us. They're coming into the network, and more people are taking time to say, I want to be on your radio program. I was able to get about 7 or 8 people, some significant people, to say, hey, Stan, I'd like to take my 10, 20, 30 minutes perhaps to tell my story and perhaps share some of my wisdom, maybe some of my insights. And I do have some things that I know to be true. And if you'd like to be one of those people who are signing up to be my guest, even kind of the co-host, and certainly the presenter to you and I of some good Jesus entrepreneur stuff, we'd love to hear from you. RadioEdge77@gmail.com, RadioEdge77@gmail.com. So why don't you make a Memorial Day start of summer resolution that you're going to listen to us from time to time, and you're going to be on the air with us from time to time, and let the world know, because we have listeners all over the world. That's how this thing works right now. Very simple, but by the time it goes all over the social media networks, it is available to people all over the world. I used to be in a situation where it took about 700-foot towers and 4 or 5 powerful 100,000-watt, 500,000-watt transmitters powered by diesel locomotive engines to make that happen. And now all of that can happen with a MacBook, the Internet, a microphone, and you, and perhaps your smartphone or your iPad or whatever it is that happens to be your favorite personal listening device. It's called a podcast. That means, if you've heard the term, personal on demand. Just like iPod meant independent, individual, personal on demand music, because you could just listen to the music you wanted to, when you wanted to, all by yourself, personally. And now, personal on demand broadcasting and video. And you can tune us in, be in touch anytime you want. And we want you to be a part of that. Right now, we're going to be teaching this because I'm going to be telling you this more and more. You're going to have to learn how to do this, because this is going to be one of the more significant ways of marketing. Both your video performances and perhaps your ability to speak and teach and reach others through the podcast, through the audio, over the internet phenomenon. If it's important, it needs to be heard. Remember, if it's important, it needs to be heard. People will still read, people will still text, but more and more, even the internet. And Google knows this. It's moving more and more to the video format. And for those who don't particularly need or want to watch, it's moving more and more to the audio. It's always been. They've always thought radio was going to die, but it always sticks around. There's something about perhaps the ability to do something else and be listening either to the music or to the conversation or perhaps to the maybe a little bit of teaching and learning. Like we say here, we hope that you'll learn more by accident than by design. So we're going to teach you a little bit about how to do that. Hey, again, my name is Stan Houston, and I am one of the co-founders of the Christian Entrepreneur Network. And we are making every effort now to grow the good things that God has given us. We're looking for donations. We're looking for people who pray. We're looking for people who play. We're looking for people who say, I think I can find a way that my life and my business and my brand could be extended because I'm in the Christian Entrepreneur Network. TCENglobal.org. Check us out and check in. Raise your hand. Say, I'm in. Well, here's what got me to be thinking a little bit, and it was a little bit melancholy. I thought about the fact, I'm not young anymore. I'm not even close. And I've been blessed. And in one of the scenes, I was reading about some of the action in the Second World War. It was simply a reminder of Uncle Jasper. And then when I heard about some of the situation in Europe, that was about Uncle George. Let me tell you what happened. Uncle George, and that's particularly my wife Karen's uncle, at the age of 19, he had been a star athlete, small guy, but a good guy, great athlete, landed up getting drafted, and before he could go to the University of Minnesota, he was up in the Iron Range, and he landed up in the Second World War, and he landed up driving a tank. That's right. And it was in North Africa, Sicily, Italy, Normandy, and even through to Germany, under a guy you've probably heard about. He said, I have been personally sworn at by the General George Patton. He literally went through the war. Friends died, tanks shot out from under him, and he survived. Injured, of course, but he survived and made it through. Now, if any of you saw the movie Fury, the film that recently came out in the last year or two with Brad Pitt, story of a tank crew in the Second World War in Europe, a lot of that was based on the story of my wife Karen's Uncle George, because that was his story. Now, of course, there was artistic license taken to it, but for many years, after I first met him, and that obviously goes back many years because that's when I first met my wife and then met George. He was just in his 40s at that time. He was teaching and coaching at a high school in northern Minnesota. He acknowledged that he'd been in the war, but he really didn't want to talk about it. Well, You don't talk about it then. Well, through the years, and because I was a history teacher, I began to ask him things. And, I'm a history teacher. I'd like to teach some of this. Well, it took a number of years before Uncle George finally began, and he opened up and started to tell his story, and it was an awesome story. A scary story, but a story of heroism and courage and many things like that. Then more and more people found out about it, and more people in the community asked him to speak, and he gained some courage and confidence and ability to do that. And eventually he was known really pretty well through America in the veterans groups as one of the persons who really knew the story of that and the very thing that we'd read about in the history books. In fact, he was even invited to Europe at some of the celebrations, the Normandy invasion, the walk through and then the tank through Europe into Holland and the Netherlands, through Belgium and into Germany. He literally wound up at the end of his time. He was one of the soldiers at Potsdam. And there's that famous conference of the big leaders, Stalin and Truman and Attlee, the World War II leaders. It turns out that he just happened to be there. Because he was of Serbian extraction, he knew Russian at least a little bit. And there were a lot of Russian soldiers around there, around Joseph Stalin, and he might pick up a little information. And that was part of his experience. When he came back, he did what most guys did, took off his uniform, went quiet, married Mary Jane, and went to work, doing what he loved, teaching and coaching. And he's still at it. He's 94. Uncle Jasper had a little more gruesome story. And I remember reading recently in the Second World War about how just terrible that was. As one guy said, what do you do when you find your buddy who's been captured and they've chopped off both his arms and chopped off both his legs and taken his genitals and chopped them off and stuffed them in his mouth, and there he's laying there? What do you do with such a scene, with such horror, with such heartbreak? Uncle Jasper, just one time, he went back, became a farmer, and that's what he did. Worked because he was getting his degree. He eventually did some work for the government, particularly in the area of agriculture. His wife was a teacher, Aunt Maureen, and they lived life well. They lived on the farm, made a simple living, raised their children, and of course were the proverbial salt of the earth. And I remember one time he was talking to me, and I got him going, and he just simply put his head down, shook his head, and said, Stan, there's no other way to describe it. They glamorize it. They put it in films, and I understand that. Iwo Jima, John Wayne, and all that. He said, but Stan, it was just a slaughter. It was just a slaughter. It was men slaughtering other men. It wasn't a battle. It was a slaughter. He said, I'm lucky to be alive. And that got me to thinking. Because one of the things that I then thought about, when I thought of all those powerful, wonderful, survivors of the Depression, men and women who were just beginning to come out of their childhood, perhaps their adolescenthood, and were seeking to at least live a life, and they get stuck off and struck off and put off in that situation, and thousands upon hundreds of thousands of them die in war. And obviously many of them injured, and many of them are hurt emotionally, spiritually, and psychologically forever. And yet, I've kind of escaped that. My life has been relatively free of that. And they died at 17, 18, 19, and hey, I'm in the 70 deal. What happened? Why was I so blessed, and why was I so graced? And that got me to thinking about, one of the themes we have here at the Christian Entrepreneur Network. If you are lucky enough to be alive, it behooves us to see how we can live fully alive. And that became another challenge to me. And that's going to be the theme this week. A theologian by the name of Richard Rohr, a Catholic priest, mystic, Franciscan, thinker, certainly a challenger, took this very week as a way to ask us to think about what it means to have God's call on our life. And that's what we talk about as an entrepreneur. God calls us. We believe the entrepreneurial lifestyle is more than a career. It is a lifestyle. It's a vocation, not an occupation. It's one of the ways that if we live it fully, we just might have that opportunity not just to be alive, but to be fully alive. Those are my thoughts. Boy, I'm blessed, even though I've got so many challenges and so many hurts and a lot of pain in my life. If pain were water, the world would drown. But at the same time, I'm graced to be here, talking to you, speaking to you, making friends, going from virtual to incarnational, connecting with people all over the world and getting the opportunity to help us all do more of the Jesus entrepreneur thing. At the same time, we now have the opportunity to be fully alive. And my question to me, as my question to you, is what does that mean? What does it mean to be fully alive? I'm going to ask you to think about that tonight, and perhaps think about that tomorrow, and perhaps this week. And why don't you decide that perhaps this summer, within the rest and reflection and recreation and all the things that will go into the summer, that you might just take a little more time this summer to decide what it will be like to be more fully alive. And perhaps that means to take seriously the Jesus call. Follow me. I'm an entrepreneur. Follow me. I'm Stan Houston. This is the Jesus Entrepreneur. You're in tune with Radio on the Edge. Radio right now. Radio, do it right for you. We'll be right back. There we go. We're done. We're always under 20 minutes. Well, most of the time. And I'm glad to be back. I'm sorry I was gone, but not. I'm glad I was gone. I'm glad to be back. But we all need to take a time away to find out what is truly important to us. And I took that time to do that. Hopefully that'll make me better at what I do. And I look forward to hearing from you. RadioEdge77 at gmail.com. RadioEdge77 at gmail.com. Again, love to hear from you. Want to hear your story? I'm going to be inviting you on the air to share your wisdom, your insight, your truth, and your ideas on how to be more fully alive right here on the radio. We're going to take it right to RadioEdge77 gmail.com. RadioEdge77 gmail.com. All the best and blessings. We'll talk again tomorrow. Bye for now.